Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. Myself and Katherine are really pleased to be here to talk about some new England-wide research, which is trying to improve understanding of council policies and their outcomes for homeless families living in temporary accommodation. And at the end of the talk, Katherine will briefly introduce some new research that she's starting with another colleague, Rosalie Warnock, also at King's, on the experiences of neurodiverse children and families living in temporary accommodation. Sorry about out of breath, I had to run from the loo. So what's brought us to this point that we're here with you today? Katherine and I have been working with homeless families in temporary accommodation TA since 2017, first in London, then in Dublin. Both of these research studies, the reports of which you can see here, explored resident experiences as they moved into and on from modular built temporary accommodation that in Lewisham, South London was branded pop-up, and in Dublin, rapid build. Very happy to talk about that more, and please do check out the reports if you're interested. So since 2022, we've been working in collaboration with Shared Health to better understand life in more standard forms of TA, with a particular focus on its financial challenges. And the research that we undertook with women in Greater Manchester shows how homeless families are stuck in a debt trap, not of their making, and are being failed by the very systems that are supposed to support them. Between May 2022 and October 2023, we conducted repeat in-depth interviews with 13 women who, along with their children, had been made homeless in Greater Manchester. And we've met each of our participants, each woman, up to 3 times across this 3.5-year period. So in our second interviews with participants, we explored journey mapping, an example of which we've got up here, to better understand their housing and financial biographies. So this consisted of using key images based on their initial interviews to create with them a visual map of their journeys into, through, and in the aftermath of homelessness, and the varying ways that debt kind of accrues and compounds along the way, along that journey. And then about a year ago now, last October, we met 7 of the women we'd worked with to feed back our findings with them and to find out their reactions in response to these. We also sought their views on what messages they wanted to send to government about their experiences and their unmet needs. So again, we were busy this time last year. In October 2023, we launched our research report, copies of which are available.
I put them on chairs.
Oh, there you go. So this report, the debt trap here, we launched this at the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Households in Temporary Accommodation. The report evidences that debt is a major factor why families become homeless. It worsens during stays in temporary accommodation, and then it continues to impact on families' futures even when their period of homelessness ends. So please do you have the reports on your chair now. We also have a QR code at the end of the talk that will take you to the online version of the report as well, if you'd prefer. So in Parliament, we were joined by one of our project participants, Irha, who came to tell her story as a life expert and did so across the table from then Under Secretary for State of what was the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And our collective message to her was that the debt trap matters. Households dealing with poverty, debt, and homelessness in England are the victims of structural inequalities produced by a political economy of failure. This is a failure at scale. Poverty is deepening. There's been a rise of very deep poverty in the past 20 years, and nearly 1 million children are now classed as destitute, nearly 3 times as many as 2017. Negative budgets, where people's basic outgoings can't be covered by their income, are becoming more widespread, including a greater number of people in full-time employment. Debt is described as unavoidable for millions. And an estimated 425,000 renters in England are in rent arrears and risk eviction. So our project is conducted at a time too when the past 50 years of neoliberalism in England has produced and harmed families who have become indebted and made homeless. While the historic availability of credit has fueled landlordism and a profit-seeking private rented sector that now houses 4.6 million households in England, social housing, as we know, and we've been talking about in the room today, has been vastly depleted at the same time. So with the aim of reducing public sector debt, since 2010, austerity has hit the most marginalised in society through this welfare rollback that we've been talking about. Austerity has also left local councils cash-starved at a time of intensifying pressures to fulfil their statutory duties to secure a roof for increasing numbers of homeless households. And again, as we've already discussed today, nationally councils are spending billions of pounds in TA in a single year. Was it £4 million a day from London boroughs that we heard this morning from Crajo? And many, understandably, again, we've already talked about, sounding the alarm of potential bankruptcy because of these costs involved. So, kind of at the crux of our argument then is that debt in its many forms and many scales is shaping the landscape of a nation in crisis. Stays in temporary accommodation need to be as short, safe and healthy as possible, given the damage they can do emotionally and physically to families. Yet, our research has shown that a key barrier to this are the rent arrears, which can inhibit a family's transition out of temporary accommodation and into a secured social housing tenancy. Dependent on the local authority, applicants who are in arrears can become ineligible or are deprioritised in the allocation system. Women and children, including domestic abuse survivors, can remain in limbo in temporary accommodation until they can reduce or clear their arrears, or in some cases prove their intent to pay. This was the case for Orla, whose temporary accommodation you can see here. With work drying up on a 0-hour contract, she fell behind on her rent. Evicted by her private landlord, she became homeless and placed in temporary accommodation. Orla describes this one-roomed TA where she eats, sleeps and cares for her baby daughter as a prison that she is stuck in. She's been trapped in temporary accommodation for more than a year because of rules on rent arrears which disqualify her from the bidding process. So while Orla has now managed to clear enough of these arrears to bid for social housing, she's been hit by another form of debt. She's not been able to afford her council tax and her postbox has become full with payment demands, the image of which you can see here. She cannot face opening them. I'll hand over to Katherine.
So how widespread are these housing allocation policies which make an applicant ineligible for social housing or reband their bidding status through the means of housing-related debt? Since January 2024, Mel, myself, and Fraser Curry from King's College London have been investigating this. And today we're really pleased to say that Vicky Spratt has published an iNews article on this data, so the first of its kind at a national level on this topic. So first, we've analysed the housing allocation policies of all 294 councils in England, and this figure excludes county councils, of which there are 21. We found that 99% of policies reference rent arrears or debt. In fact, there are over 5,000 mentions of these terms in housing allocation policies nationally. Given the widespread presence of rent arrears and debt in housing allocation policies, we need to ask another question. Are housing-related debt rules excluding those most in need of housing? And our view is clearly yes, they are excluding families in TA from housing. In 2019, the Chartered Institute of Housing raised more general concerns in this regard, and you have the quotes here, about rationing processes, particularly in relation to decisions about who gets to access waiting lists, how those who do get access are prioritised, and the potential for pre-tenancy activity to exclude those who are most in need of housing. The Rethinking Allocations report was clear, and I quote again, ensuring tenancies are sustainable is important, but activity to help achieve this is undermining efforts to house those who need homes the most. Our worry is that households in TA are being judged as financial risks, as tenants, rather than as vulnerable families who need and deserve housing. Our policy analysis shows that most councils in England have housing-related debt rules. 88% have an ineligibility policy related to housing-related debt. 54% have a deprioritisation policy linked to housing-related debt. 70% have something that's called an intent to pay policy, and I'll come on to that in a bit. And 72% have intent to pay policies that mandate consecutive payments before eligibility is potentially restored. Some councils are far more punitive than others, and we can really see a postcode lottery which characterises the current landscape across England. So we've come up with 6 things that will kind of tend to typify more stigmatising or more punitive allocation policies. Yeah, we can. Yeah. So first, some council policies are more stigmatising than others, and this is something that Kwojo brought up earlier around stigma and culture. This is fed into policy. So they often characterise households in rent arrears as, I quote, unsuitable tenants. It's not uncommon for someone in debt to be classed as guilty of unacceptable behaviour, sitting alongside antisocial behaviour. Second, they have a range of definitions in terms of what they encompass within how they formulate housing-related debt. So more punitive ones would have a range of different debt types, for example, rent and council tax arrears, service charges, damage costs, and sometimes even to private landlords. Third, more punitive housing allocation policies include housing-related debts from different providers. So as I've just mentioned, some, it's quite rare, but it does exist, include private rent arrears to private landlords, not just the council. Fourth, they cover debts accrued by the applicant, I quote, or anyone who usually lives with them or might reasonably be expected to live with them. Fifth, they have intent to pay policies that stipulate a high number of consecutive repayments that are required before they can be considered for housing, or they have to reduce the amount of their arrears to an incredibly low value before their eligibility is potentially restored. And sixth, they are limited in their discretion, the exemptions, the exceptional or mitigating circumstances that are explicitly stated. Now, on the point about exceptions, I think it's incredibly important to note this, that although 94% of council policies, so this is housing allocation policies, mention domestic abuse in their writing, only 17% specifically state that they exempt victims from housing-related debt rules. And we know from our research, through the lived experiences of women that we have met, that domestic abuse survivors are being hit by these rules. We've also spent considerable time since January trying to ascertain how many households in TA nationally have been impacted by these housing-related debt rules. And we've sought this through FOI requests to the 294 councils. And for this, we covered the month of December 2023. So what have we found out? Well, first off, thousands of households in TA have been determined as ineligible for social housing due to rent arrears. And this figure for December 2023 was 3,791. This is, we believe, a significant underestimate. We absolutely can vouch for the fact that there would be more than 10,000 households in England for this 1 month. And this is based on the number of councils that didn't reply or weren't in a position to reply with the data. 43% of these households, so nearly half, include one child who is under the age of 18, and 5% of these households include a child who is 2 years old or under. This means that well over 1,000 children living in TA in December 2023 alone had been deemed ineligible for social housing. Second, hundreds of households in TA are being deprioritised for social housing due to rent arrears. Over half of these households, so 51%, again include at least one child under the age of 18, and 14% of these households include a child who is 2 years old or under. In this data set, London is a hotspot for households impacted by debt ineligibility rules. So 80% of ineligible households in TA live in a London borough. 44% of households, so nearly 1 in 2, include a child under the age of 18, and 4% of these households include a child who's under 2. Now, these statistics do not necessarily mean that London boroughs are necessarily more punitive in their policies, and this is something that we are going to be kind of doing more in-depth analysis on in the next year. But this skew also possibly reflects the fact that the capital accounts for over half of households in TA in England. And London figures are likely to be much higher still, so 18 out of 32 London boroughs did not provide figures in response to our FOI. In the data we did receive, 65% of England-wide boroughs listed here, who, so households that were impacted by ineligibility rules come from just 4 London boroughs. Again, this is not to say that these 4 London boroughs are more punitive than others in their treatment of housing-related debt. And in fact, these are boroughs who were able, unlike many others, to provide the data at all. Typical responses from London boroughs are really mirrored by what we saw nationally. The responses were, we do not hold the information you have requested, we are not able to report in retrospect, so we would go back in every single case and ask for current figures for a 1-month period. Our systems recording information on family structure are not fully integrated with our housing register, was another one that was common. And this will require a manual trawl, which meant that the numbers of hours in the FOI would be exceeded. And this was very much what I would call a classic in the response. So these responses really reflect technical and other challenges for local authorities in being able to report and really understand the impacts of their respective housing allocation policies on indebted homeless families, including huge numbers of children. Before we undertook this England-wide research, we produced this kind of illustration of the recommendations based on what women told us in Greater Manchester in 2023. And the first recommendation you can see here is scrapping housing-related debt rules in housing allocation policies. Is this the right suggestion? We are currently looking to provide precise and feasible recommendations based on our policy and FOI analysis. This means working productively and supportively with local authorities, perhaps people in this room who could contact us afterwards or would be happy to give us their contact details. We'd like to reflect on these rules, what might be possible, and learn from the lived experiences of families who we've met. At a minimum, these rules need review, and councils need to be given the capacity and resources to be able to monitor who is being impacted and in what way by the policies that they themselves are setting. Questions then include, is flexibility in the statutory guidance on social housing allocations justified, given the human costs of housing-related debt rules? Should there be a single policy for the allocation of social housing? Now, this is all very much food for thought, and we'd certainly welcome further discussion on this in what we're going to be actively working around next year. There's lots of technical and legal implications which we need to work through. So part 2 was going to be on cots and safer sleeping. So in response to the change that was made, the hugely positive change that was made, and we've heard about that this morning, we also, at the same time, but not in the same FOI request, did the same process with all 294 councils to understand what safer sleeping advice was being given. I don't have time today because we've eaten too much food to give information, but if you'd like it, then please do contact us. So I will just skip through it to the final. As you can see, local authorities pay for most cots. Okay, and then the final slide is just to mention some new work. Again, there may be people in the room who we should speak to, who we can learn from, so it'd be great to be put in contact. So we've just been awarded money from the Leverhulme Trust for a 2-year study. This is with my colleague who works with neurodiverse families. She's based at King's, and this is a project which will lead new research on everyday life in temporary accommodation based on experiences of parents, neurodiverse children and their siblings. So we'll be co-designing a children's mobile playhouse tent to communicate findings in a kind of sensorily diverse way, which we hope will travel the country in year 2. And we hope that this project will bring to the fore the unmet needs of neurodiverse children and families in TA to policymakers to try and create change, which is so desperately needed. And I will just leave you here with our contact details and a QR code to the report, which I think I've spammed you all with in physical form on your chairs. So thank you very much.